One of the most exciting things about FPV is how quickly it moves to keep up with the ever-changing demands of its users. When a Cinewhoop was first created, it was designed to carry a camera approximately the weight of a GoPro Hero 6 or a Hero 7. It had 3-inch props, it used roughly 1507 sized motors, and it had tall TPU ducts. And that has all changed today, and that's why we're looking at the GEPRC Cinelog35. That's the quad you're seeing fly right now. The Cinelog35 has 3.5-inch props, and that's designed to help it deal with the weight of heavier action cameras like the GoPro Hero 10, as well as give it more speed, smoothness, and agility when flying outdoors. It also doesn't have the traditional ducts that a Cinewhoop has. It has much smaller prop guards, which means that you don't get the efficiency gain that true ducts give you. But it turns out that most of the ducts on most Cinewhoops today, pretty much all Cinewhoops except the original Chendrone Squirt, weren't giving you that efficiency gain anyway. So the question that we're going to look at today is, how does the GEPRC Cinelog35 stack up against the original Chendrone Squirt? And is it the right Cinewhoop for you? I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. The GEPRC Cinelog35 that I'm reviewing in this video was sent to me by GEPRC for the purposes of this video. I have not received any cash or other compensation in exchange for this video, and no one has had any approval or preconditions on the contents of this video before it was released. And the first thing that stands out to me about this quad is the way that they've designed the frame. A lot of times the ducts on a Cinewhoop are, well, the original ducts are TPU and they're pretty flexible, and that's nice, but they don't do as good a job of protecting the props because when you hit something, the TPU flexes and the prop takes the brunt. They protect the actor or the car that you're chasing from damage, but not so much your quad. If you go to something like this, you end up with much better protection for your props and better protection for your subject. And these are pretty durable, these big, thick ones. But the problem is that when you surround the prop with something like this, it really affects the handling of the quad. The aerobatic handling is so much worse on these. I mean, they'll flip and roll, but just terrible prop wash, not really maneuverable, and it can even cause small oscillations and jitters in normal cruising forward flight. It's most apparent when you get close to the ground and you get into ground effect. You'll get this instability that you do not get when you get rid of these prop guards. Now, I don't have a good example here, but the iFlight ProTech 25 and ProTech 35 that I reviewed had this thin style of prop guard, but they had durability issues, and for all I know, they've changed the frames and fixed them, so I don't want to call those two quads out specifically, but I really like what GEPRC has done here, because these prop guards are thin enough to give you the better aerobatic handling, better prop wash handling, sharper cornering, and smoother handling when down in ground effect. But the way that they've designed them, the plastic that they've made them out of, it is extremely strong and extremely crash resistant. And I think it is one of the best Cinewhoop frames in terms of durability that I've seen so far. The motors on the Cinelog35, like the motors on all of the GEPRC Cinelog series, are set up in a pusher configuration. That means that the motor is upside down and the prop pushes down away from the motor instead of pulling air up past the motor. And the main advantage of this is that there's always a low pressure area of air coming into the prop, and then a high pressure area of concentrated air, if you will, coming out of the prop. And when you have an obstruction in the high pressure area, it causes a lot more loss of thrust and a lot more turbulent air and just causes more problems. So by putting the arms of the frame in the low pressure area of the props, the intake, if you will, you get better handling and you get more thrust, although this isn't terribly thick in how much sort of percent of the thrust column it would obstruct. I think it's more about the turbulent air and the effect on handling. So pusher configuration, very good. But that's not the only thing GEPRC have done with the motors. The motor that GEPRC have chosen for the Cinelog35 is 2004 in size, and most commonly I see these motors used on 4-inch and lightweight 5-inch quadcopters. So to put it on this 3.5-inch prop means that it is in some ways, it means that it's definitely going to have enough torque to sort of swing the motor around. But there's something else about the shape of this motor that's very beneficial. The most common size of motor that we have seen on Cinewhoops in the past is like a 1507 or maybe a 1408. And you can see that that makes the motor relatively tall and not very wide. The main advantage of a wide motor, if you're thinking torque right now, that's actually not correct. Wider motors don't have more torque than taller motors. In general, the torque of a motor is proportional to its volume, pretty much regardless of its shape. Controversial claim, I know, but there's a Chris Rosser video where he talks about that, and I'll put a link to that down in the video description if you want to check that out after you're done watching this. The main advantage of a wider motor is that it has more surface area for air to move through and to cool the motor. And hot motors on Cinewhoops is a constant complaint. And part of the reason for that is that on these little 3-inch props and the big heavy GoPros that they're being asked to carry, the motors are just overworked. But I think another reason is that the taller motors that people have selected in the past weren't getting as good cooling. By going to the 2004 size and by going up to a 3.5-inch prop, we get additional cooling. Is it more volume? I'd have to do the math on 2004 versus 1507. I'm not convinced that it's more volume. And we get a larger prop, so we get more efficiency and more thrust, and we just all in all, and you get better aerobatic handling as well. Just all in all, you get a quadcopter that can fly better with the weight of a GoPro on it. With cooler motors, just all around a great choice of motor. You can see here that GEPRC have mounted both the GoPro and the FPV camera on these shock absorbing mounts. There's this isolation plate here, and both of the cameras are mounted on it. And the idea there, of course, is that it's going to do a better job of getting rid of the jello and vibrations that sometimes plague smaller quadcopters that try to carry big cameras. I'm going to show you footage, unstabilized raw footage out of the camera later, and we can see how good of a job it does there. One disadvantage of this that I did experience was that in pretty much every landing, the camera got whacked a little bit and the angle changed. And in fact, I even ended up in a situation where like every second or third time I'd plug the quad in, the camera wouldn't power up, and I would just power cycle and it'd come back. And my best guess is that the camera wire has gotten jogged loose by the vibration and specifically the shock of the camera tipping down every time I land. I don't know what I would do about that. Could you just tighten the screws? I don't know, I guess. I think I have them pretty tight, but that certainly is a consequence of the way that the camera is mounted. The flight controller on the Cinelog35 is a little bit hard to see in there, but take my word for it. It is an F7 flight controller with a built-in BLHeli S ESC. It's a 35 amp ESC for the 4S version and a 45 amp ESC for the 6S version. It's also very nice that GEPRC puts the same flight controller in both the DJI and the analog version of this quad. Some manufacturers have been putting an upgraded flight controller in only the DJI version. I'm not sure why they do that, but it's the same F7 flight controller in both. As far as the consequences of having an all-in-one ESC and flight controller in one, personally I would hesitate to do that on like a 5-inch racing quad or freestyle quad, but on something of this size I don't inherently mistrust it, and we see that a lot with 3-inch and 3.5-inch quads that aren't going to be crashed too hard or flown too hard, and GEPRC seems to have a pretty good track record there. Getting at the USB port is a problem that plagues some Cinewhoops. This one I didn't really have a problem. It's buried in there a little bit, but the standoff is just far enough out of the way that at least for me, I could, if I was a little bit careful, I could plug the USB cable in with no issue. The video transmitter on mine is the Caddx Vista. Actually, it's a polar camera, and it's very nice that they've mounted the Vista VTX here. If you do need to get at it, you can't get at the USB for the Vista without taking it out of the quad, but you just take these 4 screws out and this plate drops out and the Vista drops out. So if you need to update the firmware, you can do that with just 4 screws removal. Binding it can be done. Obviously, you just kind of reach in there with a screwdriver and poke the binding button. Do be careful. A lot of people are breaking the binding button off their Vistas. And all I can say is, I'm not bragging or trying to make you feel bad, but I've never broken a binding button on my Vista. So I'm gonna guess that y'all are just being too rough with them. And you're just like, I'll bite you, son of a bitch. So be careful. If you go in there with a hex driver or something, be really, really gentle trying to poke it, or just take it out and use your finger. I don't have the analog version to show you, but the analog version has a 600 milliwatt video transmitter. If this was a long-range cruising freestyle quad, I might complain about that. For a Cinewhoop, I don't know. I mean, Cinewhoops are going to be flown indoors, and they're going to need penetration through walls. And you might need to fly like all the way around the building for your big, awesome one-take shot. So I was about to say 600 milliwatts is fine for a Cinewhoop, but well, you might actually want more. If you do want more, obviously you can put a more powerful VTX in there. GEPRC actually has a high-powered VTX. I think Nick Burns tested it at 1.6 watts. So you certainly could try to upgrade to a bigger VTX. If you, I mean, heck, if you can fit a Vista in there, surely you can fit a more powerful VTX in there, right? 600 milliwatts is what you get if you buy the analog one. Before we go out and fly these guys, I want to put them on the scale for you so you can see roughly how they stack up. And you know what? I'm going to get the right GoPro to go with each of them too. So here's the Cinelog35, and we're going to put a 1000 milliamp hour 4S pack on there, which is closer to what they actually recommend. And here's a GoPro Hero 10, and it does have the battery in. And that's going to put us at 542 grams. You do have the option, and I actually did this for some flights, and I really like the results. You can take the battery out, and iFlight makes a balanced plug to USB adapter that saves you a fair amount of weight. Of course, if you crash, you could damage your GoPro and you could lose your footage, but that's a trade-off that some people are willing to make. And if you were to run it that way, you would come in, dang it, you would come in at closer to 500 grams, 502 exactly. Now, if we compare that to the OG, the Squirt comes in at 325 grams with the GoPro, and the battery, same battery, comes in at 613 grams. A fair amount heavier, and not like a lot, but you know, a fair amount heavier, and gonna handle much worse due to the prop guards / ducts. Here's the Cinelog30, and it would run with this Naked Hero 8, and it's going to be substantially lighter. And I don't actually have the perfect battery for this one, the one that GEPRC recommends. This is they recommend like a 650 milliamp hour, or maybe a 440. No, that's for the 2.5. They recommend like a 650 milliamp hour 4S. This is a 520, but it's actually a high volt, so it's not really 520 milliamp hours. With that battery, it comes in at 240 grams. I flew it with an 850, which is bigger than GEPRC recommends, comes in at 282 grams. So we have a massive amount of weight savings by going down to this naked GoPro. But like I said at the beginning of the video, you've decided you want a full GoPro for your own reasons, and that means you're stuck with those heavier quads. Finally, we've got the Cinelog25, the 2.5-inch version. Comes in at 135 grams dry. We'll put a Caddx Peanut on here, and the battery, add a battery, and we're coming in at 218 grams. Not as much lighter than the 3.0 as I would have guessed. How does that all affect how the quad flies? That's the big question, and the only way to answer it is to go outside and fly. Let's do it. Now, the first thing I did was I took the quads out and I just did a very, very brief sort of acro-y freestyle run. Even though that's not usually what they are asked to do when they're used as intended, I feel like how they respond to being pushed hard tells you something about them. And the Cinelog35 did a pretty good job. Obviously, it's not a freestyle monster like a 5-inch, but it didn't have any of the really awful traits that Cinewhoops, and especially ducted Cinewhoops, often have. Next, I took the Shendrone Squirt out and did the same thing, and the first thing I noticed was how much the Shendrone Squirt feels like a 3-inch, whereas the Cinelog35 feels like a larger quad. I especially noticed in the flingability. In a minute, you're going to see me try to flip over the house, and it just doesn't carry as much as I would have expected. It's odd because it is a larger, heavier quad, so you would think it would have more fling. Maybe the air resistance, the drag of the ducts is causing it to slow down more. As I got into harder yaw moves, I noticed one of the big disadvantages of the Squirt. Here we go. Oh, Look at that bounce back. Look at that. Oh, just awful handling on yaw. Oh, wow. It's really getting all out of sorts when we do strong yaw moves. And that has to do with the ducts, I think. We'll also notice it gets all out of sorts here as we come over the trees. Wubba, wubba, wubba. That was not me on the sticks. That was the quad. So the lack of duct on the Cinelog35 is making a big difference in its acro handling. Next, we're going to do some more cinematic style flying with the Cinelog35. The camera is a GoPro Hero 10 and the battery is an 850 milliamp hour 4S. This is actually a little bit smaller than GEPRC recommends, but I didn't have a 1000 milliamp hour with a XT30 on it. By the way, GEPRC has started shipping them with XT60s, not XT30s, maybe for that very reason. And frankly, I don't know what more you could ask for. This is completely unstabilized footage. The shock absorbing mount, I guess it's doing a great job because there is really no jello, no vibration at all. It just looks really, really good. I am surprised at how high in the throttle I had to be to get off the ground. So I'm cruising at definitely above 50% throttle. Like, I can't see exactly where I'm at, but I was a little surprised because with the 3.5-inch props, I would have thought maybe I would have a little more thrust than that. Of course, that all goes back to the weight and the motor KV, but and the Hero 10 is a heavier camera. It definitely, like, you can see me struggle here to kind of have to pop up and get a little out of sorts to get over those trees. It definitely doesn't have the kind of thrust you would get from a 5-inch. So one of the questions you're going to ask as you consider the 3.5-inch Cinewhoop is whether you'd rather just be flying a 5-inch. And although they do have a little bit of overlap in their capabilities, it's certainly not going to replace a 5-inch. Now here we come back to the Chendrone Squirt, and you're going to immediately notice, look at this, how rough. Do you see that kind of jiggling right there? I'm not even sure if you saw it. It's just this little roughness, and that is something that a lot of traditional Cinewhoops are plagued with. And the reason you don't see it in the final footage is because they're always using stabilization to get rid of it. But that has to do with the ducts, I guess. And before you criticize, oh, well, maybe it's your PID tune is bad. This is the exact same PID tune that Paul Nerkele uses on his, I don't know if Paul still uses the Chendrone Squirt or if he's moved on to something else, but when he used a Chendrone Squirt, this was the exact same PID tune that he used. So, I mean, it's got everything going for it. Here's another stronger example of that kind of roughness that I'm talking about right about here. Boom, buddy, boom, buddy, boom, buddy, boom. That's just how the quad flies, you know? And the GEPRC Cinelog35 and other quads like it that don't have the bigger ducts and have a better designed frame don't do that. And that roughness is even more pronounced as we get closer to the deck and do a little low proximity stuff. The way that the air comes out of the ducts really increases the ground effect and causes the quad to get really bumpy as it gets into proximity, especially below itself, gets into proximity of objects, which of course a Cinewhoop is often asked to do. Now we're going to go into a little bit of a tighter environment. And here I will say that we're going to see the Cinelog35 in a second, but I will say that the Chendrone Squirt, I felt much more confident in this tighter environment. I don't know if it was the size, I don't know if it was the thrust, what it was about it, but I felt more confident with the smaller props and the smaller quad going into this tighter environment. And as you think about the sort of stereotypical Cinewhoop shot of like the bartender reaches out to pour a pint, and as he does, the quad flies between his arms, you know, the extra inch or so, I mean, it can make a difference when going through tight spots like that, both for the pilot's ability and for the actor's confidence. Now here's the Cinelog35 doing the same thing, and I'm even going to show you the DVR footage so you can see there's no stabilization or anything going on. It is just a much smoother flying quad, in my opinion, most likely due to the lack of ducts. That gives better handling, better airflow, less efficiency, but as those efficiency gains aren't really realized for most ducted Cinewhoops today anyway. Yeah, as we fly under here, skimming the deck, no unsmoothness or anything. It's just like you would expect. And now we'll fly around inside the barn, and this is GoPro footage, and for once it is stabilized. I thought I'd show you what stabilized footage looked like, although it's not the most dynamic footage, but there you go. And as I said earlier, I just felt a lot less confident. I was still able to kind of do what I needed to do, but it felt like you're going to see a lot more hesitation in my movements. I don't know if that has something to do with the larger quad. It's weird because it's lighter weight and larger props, so it should have sort of more authority, and you wouldn't think that just the little half-inch of additional diameter on the props would make that much different, but I did feel less confident going through here. And yeah, I did check all the other things that might cause that, things like up tilt and so forth, and they were all sort of the same between the two quads. It just kind of makes sense that a bigger quad is going to be better at moving fast outdoors and better at aerodynamic flying or aerobatic flying, but not as good at tighter flying, and that is consistent with my experience. So you're like, oh where am I? And I think that starts to sum up who this quadcopter is right for. There's a reason that the original Cinewhoops were 3-inch and not 3.5 or 4 or 5-inch, because you wanted something small enough to get close to people, get into small areas. As you move up to this size, you get something that's a little faster, and you get something that can be a little bit more acrobatic. But as you get into tighter environments, it's not like you get that for free. I think for a lot of people, they're going to see that the Cinelog3 or something like it, or maybe even the Cinelog35, which once you get down to 2.5-inch props, now you're really giving them a lot in terms of flight time, in terms of acrobatic performance, and so on, and you really struggle with vibrations, although there are things you can do. But if you're looking for something that can get a little bit of the speed and smoothness and acrobility of a 5-inch, but still do some of the stuff that Cinewhoops do, this might be the one for you. And especially if you're having to carry the extra weight of a Hero 10, then the larger props are going to give you some advantage. If you do decide that you'd like to pick up a Cinelog35, there are links down in the video description below, and in case you're new here, those are affiliate links. And what that means is that when you make any purchase at the affiliated vendor, you don't have to buy this product. If you like this product, buy it. If you like something else and you just want to help support the channel, come to my channel, click the affiliate link, and then go do your shopping and check out. I get a small commission off of everything you buy. That's one of the ways that I balance my need to make a living with my responsibility to be objective as a viewer. Because the affiliate links aren't tied to any specific product, I have no stake in promoting any specific product. I just have a stake in sending you to the store to do your shopping. And click that affiliate link before you do. I'll put a link to this Shendron's Squirt too, assuming Rotoride is still making it. Shendron's has some new stuff out there as well, but if they're still making it, I'll put a link to that, and I'll put a link to my original Cinewhoop Roundup. Frankly, in this day and age, my original Cinewhoop Roundup is a little bit dated, but maybe you'd like to check that out as well. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Happy flying. Do you see this baby? Isn't he cute? Hit the subscribe button. Join my Patreon. Use my affiliate links, or just keep watching videos. That's better than nothing.
Go, go, gaga, subscribe to my daddy.